The things mentioned in this section occurred around 36 AD, about 33 years before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. At this time, Israel was somewhat ruled by the Romans, who took over Israel during the wars of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and others. Well, Mark Antony brought into Israel the second Legion Triana Fortis, which stayed for a very short time. And following this was the entrance of the 10th Legion Fretensis, which occupied Jerusalem at the time of Christ. In the north, the 6th Legion Ferrata was brought in, and a camp was built in Megiddo west of the Sea of Galilee, which held possibly 5,000 troops, of which Cornelius undoubtedly visited or lived in. A Roman legion was led by a legate, like our general, and under the legate were 6 tribunes who helped the legate. The legion was divided into 10 cohorts, of which in this study we'll meet 2 centurions of cohorts that had names. Within the cohort were 6 groups of centuries, led by a centurion, over 80 to 100 men. And also during this time, there were many battles between the Jews and Romans, as was mentioned in Josephus's book, The Jewish Wars. So one would imagine there wasn't much love between the Jews and the Romans. But with Cornelius, we'll see an exception. Well, right before this time, the crucifixion of Christ occurred, with Roman troops being involved. And the resurrection story was spread abroad, and undoubtedly Cornelius heard of it. Thus our section begins with this story of Cornelius, the centurion, and Peter, the eyewitness to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Our story begins in chapter 10, verses 1 to 8. Cornelius receives a message from God, and it begins, Anir they tis in Caesarea, and there was a certain man in Caesarea, anomati Cornelios, by name Cornelius, ekatan tarchis, ek spiris tis calumenis italikis, from the cohort being called Italic. And we showed in our introduction the cohort, and here we have a man that's a centurion, over 80 to 100 men. It says that he was in Caesarea. Here we have a map of Israel. We see Caesarea down on the ocean, and here is Tel Megiddo, which we will go into a little bit later in this video. But it's right here, right between Caesarea and the Sea of Galilee, and Capernaum is right about at the top. In Caesarea, where Cornelius was stationed, there was a place in the Bible that mentions about Herod Agrippa I being struck down while giving an address to people. And then we have the rulers Felix and Festus being there, and later we'll meet them with Paul's journey. And then Herod Agrippa II comes in Bernice at the trial of Paul. A centurion. It says that he was a centurion, which we have seen. Here's the picture of it, the full picture. Quite a few centurions in the New Testament. They're also mentioned in the Old Testament, but they're not called centurions, because that is a Roman term. They were called rulers of 100. And there's 24 times that is used in the ekatantarchis. It means over 100, ruler of 100. 24 times in the Old Testament, 21 times as a centurion in the New Testament. The first centurion we meet is the one who sent men to Jesus so that Jesus would heal his servant. That's in Matthew 8, 5 to 13, in Luke 7, 2-6. The next centurion is at the crucifixion. It says in Luke 23:47, and the centurion, beholding the thing taking place, glorified God, saying, really, this man was just. And then the next centurion is after the death. It says in Matthew 27:54, truly this was Son of God, when the earthquake took place in the darkness. Then next one would be here, it's Cornelius. Then in Jerusalem, where Paul is going to be whipped, but the centurion finds out that Paul is a Roman and warns the commander, Acts 22:26, 23:17. And then later, 2 centurions lead Paul to Caesarea after the Jews try to kill him. That's Acts 23:23 and 24:23. And then next, on Paul's journey to Rome, we have a centurion named Julius of the cohort Augustus, which is tied to the emperor, and that's in Acts 27:1-28:16. It says in Acts 27:3, and Julius, kindly having treated Paul, permitted him, having gone to his friends, to attain care. Then another centurion was on the boat, or it's probably the same one, Julius, where the crew wanted to kill the prisoners, but it says in 27:43, but the centurion, wanting to save Paul, restrained them of their will. Back to verse 2. Asavis ke phovumenos ton theon sin panti to eco avtu. And he was pious and fearing God with all his house. Well, a house is a building, but a household. Having been pious, 21:52. It says in Isaiah 26:7, the way of the pious becomes straight, and the way of the pious is being prepared. Then in Isaiah 32:8, but the pious consult the discerning, and this counsel shall abide. For Peter says in 1 Peter 2:9, the Lord knows to rescue the pious from tests. So he was pious and fearing God with all his household. Pion te elimosinas polas toleo, both performing much charity to the people, ke theomenos tu theou theapantos, and beseeching God always. And the charity, it says in Matthew 6:3, but you doing charity, let not your left hand know what your right does. That's to the Christian, but of course at this time Cornelius wasn't, and he was giving to the poor people and different things for the Jews, and he was well known for it. In Luke 11:41, it says, the things being within give charity, and behold, then everything is clean to you. Instead of the worrying about cleansing of the Jews, Jesus shows that there is a greater thing than cleansing, and that would be the charity. So he was beseeching God always. Luke 5:12, it says, and seeing Jesus falling upon his face, he beseeched him, saying, O Lord, if you should want, you are able to cleanse me. In verse 3, Ethan en oramati phaneros, osi oran enatin tis imeris, angelon tu theou isel thonta prosafton, and he beheld in a vision openly. So this was a visible display that he saw about the 9th hour of the day, which was a time of prayer. It was also when Jesus died on the cross, and Peter healed the lame man with Acts 3:1, the 9th hour. So there's this angel now standing in front of Cornelius. Ke eponta avto, and having said to him, Cornelius? O they atanisas avto, And having gazed upon him, ke emphobos, genomenos, and becoming thrown into fear, ipe, ti esti Kyrie, he said, what is it, O Lord? Ipe de avto, and he said to him. So he was thrown into fear, seeing this angel. I'm sure I would be too if I'm laying there praying, and all of a sudden I open my eyes and somebody's standing in my bedroom, probably flashing white lightning and who knows what. I'd be very scared. So, but he calls him Kyrie. Now, Kyrios can be a lord, a master. In this case, it's an angel. It's not always divinity, but many places it is. Generally, when it's in divinity, then I capitalize Lord, capital L-O-R-D. Prosevke su ke elimo sine, su anevisan is minimo sinon, enopion tu theou. Your prayers and your charity ascended for a memorial before God. In verse 5, Kenin pempson is eopin andra, and now send forth men unto Joppa. I think it was like 30 miles. Ke metab pemsa Simona os epikalite Petros, and fetch Simon, who is called Peter. Utos xenizate para tini simoni versi. This one lodges with a certain Simon, a tanner, and we mentioned that in the last section where Simon healed Tabitha Joppa. O estin ikia para thalasan, whose house is by the sea, the Mediterranean. Utos lalisi si ti se the peeing. This one will tell you what you must do. Os the apilthen o angelos o lalon to Cornelio, and when the angel speaking to Cornelius departed, phonisas theo ton ikaton avtu, having called two of his servants, ke stratiotin of Savi, and a pious soldier, so somebody that was wanting to do the right thing of God. Of the ones ton pros skartarun ton avto, attending constantly to him. Ke exegisamenos avtis apanta, and having described to them all things, apestion avtus estin eoapin, he sent them unto Joppa. On trying to put together this study of something that I found of immense interest, of a magnificent find in Israel concerning centurions, I began to gather information from articles on the internet which concerned the actions of Roman centurions who were the first non-Jewish believers, and in Israel. Most of the articles I found on the internet relate more to the physical findings on the following subjects than spiritual information on who were the people involved and how did they relate to Christ. Well, what's more important, the coat that Jesus wore or the actions and relevance of what Jesus did? Our focus in this video began with Cornelius the centurion, and we'll try and extrapolate what sequence of events took place that relate to us today. As mentioned, Cornelius was a centurion stationed in Caesarea, but the main camp of the legionnaires was located near today's village of Lejeune, which name the Palestinians use for the village. The camp was for stationing about 5,000 legionnaires at various times, starting with the 2nd Legion Traiana Fortis, which occupied the camp possibly at the time of Christ, as roof tile fragments bearing their name were found in the debris of the current campsite. The building of this camp was followed by the arrival of the 6th Legion Ferrata, and these people may have been the main builders of the camp. The 6th Legion Ferrata's occupation lasted for a few hundred years or longer, and most of the roof tiles bore the 6th Legion Ferrata's imprint. A Roman imperial road led from Caesarea to Scythopolis, the capital of the Decapolis mentioned in Matthew 4:25, and the road passed by Legio, the Latin name of the camp at the time of Christ. The site of the camp is next to the current Highway 65, where it crosses Highway 66 in northern Israel, which is near the Megiddo prison in Galilee. During the Roman times, the site was located near the village of Kephar Otne, which is mentioned in the Mishnah, where in Danby's Mishnah, in Gittin 1.5, it says, "No writ is valid which has a Samaritan as witness, accepting a writ of divorce or a writ of emancipation." They once brought a bill of divorce before Rabban Gamaliel at Kephar Otne, and its witnesses were Samaritans, and he pronounced it valid. And another mention in the Mishnah of the village is in Gittin 7.7. The campsite was first investigated by Gottlieb Shoemaker, an American archaeologist in the early 1900s, and who reported architectural ruins and a roof tile with LIGVIF, the 6th Legion Ferrata. Then in the 1990s, Yotam Tepper, an Israeli archaeologist, further investigated the site and has written many articles on Legio. But it wasn't until the 2000s that excavations at the Megiddo prison revealed a Christian prayer hall within a Roman camp. The camp itself is about 1,200 by 1,900 feet, about 4 football fields wide and 6 football fields in length. Within the camp were found pottery and coins going back to Agrippa I, who reigned from 11 A.D. to 44 A.D., thus possibly dating the camp to the time of Christ. The first centurion mentioned in the Bible is in Luke 7, verses 1 to 10, and he was a centurion who sent elders of the Jews to Capernaum, who appealed to Jesus to heal the centurion's servant, who had an illness. As the camp was only about 50 miles from Capernaum, it might be assumed that the centurion was stationed in Legio. As the centurion had his request filled in a miraculous way, he probably told others in the camp of this miracle and how Jesus healed his servant. The mention of this miracle was probably circulated throughout the camp. But around this time, another centurion, probably having heard of the miracle, having a paralytic servant who needed healing, well, this centurion himself went to Capernaum, as is mentioned in Matthew 8, 5 to 13, and thus his servant was healed by Jesus. These two occurrences with centurions, possibly stationed in Legio, would have caused the good news of Jesus to spread even further. A few years later, in time when Jesus was being crucified, a centurion being nearby said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." And the centurion at the tomb said, "Really, this man was just." One would imagine that the centurions who had their servants healed by Jesus heard of the death and resurrection of the healer, and they might have questioned if Jesus was Son of God. If so, then the ones in Legio may have felt it necessary to make or build something to mark the impact of Jesus on them. Well, did other legionnaires begin to believe they're centurions? Probably. At this time, Cornelius, the centurion in Caesarea, might have visited Legio on the road from Caesarea, which passed by Legio, and heard of the resurrection. Well, Cornelius, a pious man, would have gone back to Caesarea unknowingly having been illuminated to certain spiritual things, and thus the visit of the angel to Cornelius. 5 centurions have now been affected in one way or another by Jesus. But later, another centurion at Legio, named Gaius, who believed in Jesus, had a prayer hall built in the middle of the camp by a man named Brutus, which contained a floor mosaic that was dedicated to God, Jesus Christ. The mosaic that was in the prayer hall was discovered between 2003 to 2008 during an excavation for the Megiddo prison. The prayer hall was approximately 16 by 32 feet and was located in a large building in the middle of the camp. Within the prayer hall laid the mosaic, which later had been carefully covered over by pottery shards to protect it for posterity, us. The mosaic contained the names of the centurion Gaius and the craftsman Brutus, along with the names of certain women. And a pedestal base for a table was in the middle of the mosaic, possibly for the elements of the Eucharist. The Megiddo mosaic is described in detail with many articles on it, which are available on the internet. Links to some of these articles will be listed in the description below of the video. As one can see, the mosaic is a magnificent work and has been wonderfully preserved. I believe that the most important thing, though, is to focus on the section of the mosaic which has the dedication by a woman named Apostolic to God, Jesus Christ, written in Greek. But as wonderful as this prayer hall and mosaic are, the focus of this video is on the centurions who were affected by Jesus Christ. We now have the 6th centurion. Well, the result of this discovery was for Israeli authorities to dig up the mosaic, for a lack of a better description, and to send it to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., with plans to return it to Israel after a restoration project is completed with the camp. Well, we'll see. Our next section is Peter and Cornelius.